The Korean Mafia boss ran into his heavily pregnant ex-wife at work. She hid his twins for 8 months. The glass doors of Helion Capital didn't make a sound when they opened, but the air in the lobby changed instantly. I was standing by the reception desk, my hand hovering over a jammed badge reader. My supervisor, Mrs. Gable, was already behind me, her voice sharp and impatient, complaining about the morning's delays. She didn't see him. I did. Chai Woo-jin walked in with 3 men in tailored suits, but he was the only one I saw. If you're here for the truth, like and subscribe now. Tell me your city and time in the comments. He stopped 10 feet away. He didn't look at the receptionists. He didn't look at the art on the walls. His eyes locked on the way I was standing, slightly hunched, my left arm wrapped tightly across my coat, trying to mask the curve of my stomach. The silence he brought with him was heavier than any shout. Mrs. Gable kept talking, her hand on my shoulder, forcing me to stay in place while she fussed with my ID. I couldn't move. I couldn't run. I felt a sharp kick against my ribs, one of the twins moving in response to my fear. I held my breath. He stepped closer, just one step. His voice was low, devoid of the rage I expected. "It's been 32 weeks, Beverly," he said. His eyes didn't flicker. He wasn't guessing. He was stating a fact. "You've lost weight in your face, but the rest of you, the timing is precise." The air left my lungs. He had done the math before I could even find my voice. He knew the day I left was the day the clock started. Behind me, Mrs. Gable was still talking about corporate protocol, completely unaware that the man standing in front of us could end her world with a nod. I looked down at my shoes, my palms damp against the marble counter. He wasn't moving. He was just watching me breathe, measuring the panic in my chest. He didn't reach out. He didn't demand I follow him. He just stood there, letting the weight of his attention pin me to the floor. I realized then that my composure was a lie. He saw the twins in the way I shifted my weight. He saw the 8 months of silence in the shadows under my eyes. "Whoever told you that you could disappear was lying," he whispered, so softly Mrs. Gable didn't even blink. "They gave you a false sense of security, and in doing so, they put you in the path of something you aren't ready for." The implication hit me. The person who helped me hide, the one who gave me the new ID and the quiet apartment, they hadn't just made a mistake. They had led him right to me. I had thought I was safe, but I was just being watched from a different angle. My hands started to shake, and as I finally swiped my badge and the gate clicked open, I knew that the danger hadn't just started. It had been here the whole time. I took the stairs to the 4th floor, my legs feeling like lead. Every floor felt like a mile. By the time I reached my desk in the HR wing, my vision was spotting at the edges. I sat down and pulled my keyboard toward me, my fingers hovering over keys I didn't have the strength to press. I waited for the security guards. I waited for the elevator to ding and for his men to walk in and take me. But nothing happened. An hour passed. Then 2. The office hummed with the usual sounds of clicking mice and hushed phone calls. Mrs. Gable walked past my desk twice, neither time mentioning the man in the lobby. It was as if he hadn't existed at all. But my body knew. My lower back ached with the weight of the twins, and my skin felt too tight. A constant reminder of the secret I had tried to bury. Was he waiting for me to break? Chai Woo-jin wasn't a man who acted on impulse. He was a man who let the pressure build until his targets dismantled themselves. I stared at a spreadsheet, the numbers blurring into gray lines. I found myself checking the office door every few minutes, my heart skipping every time someone in a dark suit walked by. At lunch, I stayed at my desk. I wasn't hungry. Around 2 p.m., a delivery arrived. It wasn't for the department. It was a small bag from the bakery 3 blocks away, the one I used to visit every morning before everything fell apart. The delivery person left it on the edge of my desk without a word. Inside was a single decaf latte and a croissant. No note, no name. I didn't touch it. It sat there, a silent testament to the fact that he knew exactly where I sat, what I drank, and how I spent my afternoons. He wasn't coming for me yet because he didn't have to. He was already here. The afternoon dragged on, a slow torture of silence. I realized he was testing me, watching to see if I would run again. But where would I go? I was 8 months along with 2 lives depending on me, and the man who owned half the city was currently buying my lunch. When the clock finally hit 5, I packed my bag. I walked toward the elevator, then hesitated and took the stairs. As I pushed through the exit door onto the street, I looked toward the curb. A black sedan was idling. The window rolled down an inch, and for a split second, I saw his profile. He didn't turn to look at me. I thought the croissant was the end of it. I thought if I ignored the food and the coffee, I could pretend the world hadn't tilted on its axis. But by the time I sat back down on Monday morning, the desk felt different. It felt like a stage. Every time a coworker looked my way, I wondered if they were on his payroll. Every time the office phone rang, I jumped. Then, at 10 o'clock, a man in a gray courier uniform walked into the HR wing. He didn't stop at the front desk. He walked straight to my cubicle, his eyes scanning the nameplates until they landed on mine. He set a heavy, rectangular box on my stack of folders. He didn't ask for a signature. He just nodded and walked away. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the box. It was plain, wrapped in brown paper, with my name written in that same clean, black ink I remembered from our marriage. My hands were damp as I tore the tape. Inside, there were 4 bottles of high-end prenatal vitamins, the expensive kind my insurance wouldn't cover, the ones I'd been eyeing at the pharmacy but could never justify buying. Beneath them was a folded slip of thermal paper. I opened it. It was a receipt from St. Jude's Maternity Center. It wasn't just a bill. It was a confirmation of a $20,000 deposit for a private suite and a specialized neonatal team. It was dated from my expected due date. Someone was pulling the strings of your life. Hit that like button and subscribe. I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and the current time in the comments. The paper felt like it was burning my skin. St. Jude's was the best hospital in the city. It was the kind of place where celebrities went to give birth in total privacy. I had been planning on a public clinic in Brooklyn, a place where I'd be just another number in a crowded waiting room. He had found my medical records. He had tracked my doctor, calculated my progress, and decided where my children would be born. It wasn't a gift. It was a claim. He was telling me that my autonomy was an illusion. He was showing me that while I had been counting pennies and skipping meals to save for diapers, he had been building a fortress around me. The vitamins were a reminder that he owned my health. The hospital deposit was a reminder that he owned my future. I looked around the office, feeling the walls close in. Nobody else noticed the box. Nobody else knew that my life had just been reclaimed by a man who didn't take no for an answer. I shoved the receipt into my bag, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I wanted to throw the vitamins away, but I couldn't. I needed them. And he knew that. He knew exactly how to make his help feel like a cage. My twins kicked, a synchronized movement that made me gasp. They felt it too. The reach of their father was long, silent, and absolute. I sat very still, realizing my silence was over. He was coming soon. The box sat on my desk like a ticking clock, but it wasn't the only thing closing in on me. Mrs. Gable, my supervisor, called me into her office 10 minutes after the courier left. She didn't look like her usual, distracted self. She looked worried, her eyes scanning my face as if she was trying to find a version of me that made sense. She closed the heavy oak door behind me, and for the first time in 8 months, the silence of the office felt like a threat instead of a comfort. She sat on the edge of her desk, her arms crossed tight. "Beverly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be very honest with me." My stomach dropped, the weight of the twins suddenly feeling twice as heavy. I tried to maintain my posture, keeping my voice level, but the panic was clawing at the back of my throat. I told her I was always honest. She didn't look convinced. She told me that someone from the executive floor, the floor where the billionaire investors and the silent partners lived, had been asking about me. They didn't ask about my performance or my attendance. They wanted my background check. They wanted my previous addresses. They even wanted to see the emergency contact I had listed on my hiring forms. "I didn't give them anything," she whispered, leaning in closer. But Beverly, they were persistent. The kind of persistent that doesn't care about HR laws or privacy. I got the sense that this wasn't a standard inquiry from the higher-ups. She asked me if I was in some kind of trouble, if there was someone I was running from. I lied. I told her I was fine, that I didn't know why anyone would be interested in a simple HR assistant. But even as the words left my mouth, I could feel the safe, anonymous world I had built for myself crumbling. My supervisor's office, which used to be a place of boring meetings and paperwork, now felt like an interrogation room. I could see the doubt in her eyes. She wanted to believe me, but she wasn't a fool. She knew that people like the ones on the executive floor didn't take an interest in people like me unless there was a reason that usually meant trouble for the company. I realized then that I wasn't just losing my anonymity, I was losing my livelihood. If I lost this job, I had nothing. No insurance, no savings, no way to protect the two lives growing inside me. I was trapped between a secret and a storm. He knew. I left the office an hour early, but it didn't feel like a head start. I took 3 different subway lines, getting off at stations I never used, just to see if the same face appeared twice. My back felt like it was being pulled apart by a wire, and every step was a battle against the swelling in my ankles. By the time I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment, I was gasping for air, my hand pressed hard against the wall for support. I fumbled with my keys, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I just wanted to lock the door and sleep for a week. I stepped inside and stood still. The air felt heavy. I looked at the kitchen counter where I always left my mail. I'm a creature of habit because habit is the only thing that kept me sane during these 8 months. I always aligned the envelopes with the edge of the marble. Now, they were shifted 2 inches to the left. It was a small thing, a tiny detail that most people wouldn't notice, but to me, it was a scream in a quiet room. Someone had been standing in my kitchen. Someone had been breathing my air while I was at work, deciding whether I was worth the trouble of taking. I checked the locks. They weren't broken. I checked the windows. They were still latched from the inside. Nothing was missing. My laptop was on the table. My emergency cash was still tucked inside the cereal box. That was the most terrifying part. A thief takes your things and leaves. A predator takes your peace and stays. I sat down on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking so hard I had to tuck them under my thighs. I looked at the twins' nursery, just a corner of the room with a second-hand crib and a stack of folded onesies. The thought of him standing there, looking at the evidence of his sons, made me feel sick to my stomach. It was a violation that felt almost intimate, like he had touched my skin without permission. Then I saw it. On the center of my pillow was a single cream-colored envelope. It was thick, expensive, and out of place in my cramped apartment. I opened it with fingers that felt like ice. Inside was a piece of paper that didn't just carry a message, it carried a mandate. You don't have to run, but you do have to talk to me. The car will be outside at 8. If you don't come, I'll come to you. W. He wasn't asking. He was giving me a choice between a public scene and a private surrender. He knew exactly where I slept. If you found an envelope like this on your pillow tonight, would you run or show up? Subscribe now if you think she's making a mistake, and tell me your choice. I spent the next 45 minutes sitting on the edge of the bathtub because it was the only room without a window. I stared at the clock on my phone, watching the numbers tick closer to 8. I could leave. I could take my go bag and disappear into the night again. But I was tired. I was so incredibly tired of looking over my shoulder, of calculating my routes, of living like a fugitive in my own city. And the truth was, he already knew where I lived. Running now would just be a delay, not an escape. If he wanted me, he had me. Exactly at 8, I looked out the kitchen window. A black sedan was idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the grime of the street. It looked like a shark in shallow water. I grabbed my coat, buttoning it tightly over my stomach, and walked down the stairs. Each step felt like a heavy stone dropping into a well. I opened the heavy front door of the building and stepped into the cold October air. The driver didn't move. He didn't even turn his head. He just waited until I reached the back door and opened it for myself. The interior of the car smelled like expensive leather and old money. The tinted windows turned the city into a blur of gray and neon. I sat in the middle of the seat, my hands folded over the twins, feeling every turn of the wheels. The driver didn't say a word. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't tell me where we were going. He just drove with a mechanical precision that made my skin crawl. We crossed into a part of the city where the streets were cleaner and the buildings didn't have graffiti. We pulled up to a modern glass structure nestled between 2 quiet brownstones. It didn't have a sign. It didn't need one. The driver finally spoke, his voice a flat monotone. He is waiting inside. I got out, my legs feeling shaky as I walked toward the entrance. The lobby was empty, except for him. He was standing by the window, his back to me, his hands clasped behind his back. He was still wearing the charcoal suit from this morning. When he turned, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes dropped immediately to my stomach. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had finally found something he'd been tracking for a very long time. I realized then that the car, the vitamins, the hospital bill, it wasn't just protection. It was a net. He had been letting me think I was free while he slowly tightened the lines. "You look exhausted, Beverly," he said. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a sentence. I realized in that moment that I hadn't been hiding at all. I had been allowed to stay lost until he was ready to find me. I was never unseen. I didn't sit down. I stood there with my hand on my stomach, feeling the twins tumble against each other, as if they knew their father was finally in the room. I told him he had no right to be in my home. He looked at me with a stillness that made my heart ache. He told me he needed to make sure I was safe, but I reminded him that wasn't his job anymore. We had ended it. I had signed the papers and walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back and a secret that was getting heavier every day. I told him he was my ex-husband. He didn't flinch. He just took a slow breath and told me that we never finalized the papers. I felt the floor tilt. I told him he was lying. I had seen the ink on the page. I had handed the envelope to the lawyer myself. But he stepped closer, the scent of his cologne filling my senses, a scent that used to mean safety and now meant capture. He told me he had watched me sign them, but he had never added his own name. He had burned the documents the night I left. Legally, I was still Beverly Chai. I was still his wife. The life I had built in that cramped apartment, the fake name I used at the bakery, the struggle to pay for a subway pass. It was all a fantasy. I had been living a lie while he had been holding on to the truth. I sat down then. My legs finally gave out. I asked him why. Why let me live like a ghost for 8 months? Why let me worry about rent and food if he was still my husband? His jaw tightened, a small flash of the man who ran the most dangerous organization in the city. He told me he wanted to see how far I would go to stay away from him. He wanted to see if I would come back on my own. But then he saw the pregnancy. He saw that I wasn't just hiding myself. I was hiding the future of his family. He told me that changed the rules. It wasn't about my pride anymore. It was about the 2 lives I was carrying. I looked at him and realized I didn't know this man at all. I thought I had escaped the power and the violence of his world, but I had just been living in a different room of his house. He told me he had been looking for me for 8 months. He told me he thought I was dead or taken by his enemies. He had searched the city, and when he finally found me, he realized I was the one who had taken what belonged to him. I felt a cold chill settle in my bones. He wasn't talking about me. He was talking about the twins. He was talking about his sons. I realized that the man standing in front of me didn't see a woman who had been afraid for her life. He saw a mother who had stolen his legacy. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I was trapped in a marriage that didn't exist and a reality I couldn't escape. It was truly a nightmare for me. I asked him how he found the hospital. I had been so careful. I had used a clinic 3 boroughs away, a place that only took cash and didn't ask for ID. I had used a different name every time I checked in. But he just looked at me with a pity that made me want to scream. He told me that there is no such thing as a secret in this city if you have enough money to buy the silence of the people in charge. He hadn't just found the hospital. He had owned it for years. He told me he had someone monitoring my medical records since the very first day I walked into the waiting room. He knew about the twins before I was even sure myself. He knew their heartbeats. He knew their weights. And then he said the words that made the world stop spinning. He told me he knew they were boys. I hadn't even told my doctor I wanted to know the gender. I wanted it to be a surprise, the only good surprise I had left. But he had taken that from me too. He had taken the first moment of discovery and turned it into a data point on a spreadsheet. Does power mean protection, or is it just another way to control someone? If you think he went too far, subscribe right now. Comment truth if you think a father has the right to know, or line if he crossed it. Tell me your time and city while you're at it. I stood up, my hands curled into fists. I told him he had no right to my body or my information. I told him that I left because of the danger, because of the people in his world who wanted me gone. I told him about the photo on my windshield, the word leave written in red ink. I expected him to be shocked. I expected him to deny it. But his expression didn't change. It only hardened. He told me he knew about the photo. He told me he was the one who made sure the person who sent it didn't stay in the city long enough to see me leave. I stared at him, the air in the room feeling too thin to breathe. He told me he let me go because he thought I would be safer in the dark. He thought if his enemies believed I was gone, they would stop looking. But he never stopped watching. He told me the rent for my apartment was paid through a shell company he owned. He told me the job at Helion Capital wasn't a coincidence. He had placed me there because it was the one building in the city with security he could trust completely. I realized my entire life for the last 8 months had been a scripted play. Every choice I thought I made for my own survival was just a move he had allowed me to make. I wasn't an independent woman fighting for her children. I was a bird in a cage that was just big enough to make me think I could fly. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my abdomen. I reached for the chair, my breath hitching. He was at my side in a second, but I pushed him away. I didn't want his help. I just wanted to be real. I wanted my life back now. I thought I knew why I ran. I thought the fear was mine to own, a cold weight I carried through the subway tunnels and into my lonely apartment. But standing in that sleek, quiet lobby, the truth felt like a physical blow. I told him about the photo. I told him how it felt to see my own face on my windshield with that single word written on the back, leave. I expected him to flinch, or maybe to get angry that I had been so easily scared. Instead, he just went very still. It was the kind of stillness that precedes a storm, a total lack of movement that made the air in the room feel heavy and hard to breathe. He asked me to describe the handwriting. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't ask why I didn't call him. He just wanted to know the shape of the letters. I told him it was sharp, slanted, and confident. I told him it looked like someone who was used to giving orders. He closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath through his nose. When he opened them again, the warmth I had briefly seen in his gaze was gone, replaced by something much colder. He told me that the photo hadn't come from his enemies. It had come from his own family. Specifically, from the circle of people who were supposed to keep me safe while he was away on business. He told me that someone close to him had decided I was a liability. They didn't want a woman who looked like me, a woman from outside their world, carrying the next generation of the Chai line. They had used my fear to do what they couldn't do with force. They had chased me away so they could maintain the purity of their power. I felt a wave of nausea. All those months of hiding, of sleeping with a chair against the door, of crying in the middle of the night because I thought I was alone. It was all because of a game played by people I had never even met. I asked him if he knew who did it. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me with a regret so deep it felt like it could swallow us both. He told me that he had his suspicions, but he had spent the last 8 months looking for me instead of looking for the traitor. He told me that his failure to protect me was the greatest shame of his life. For a moment, the power dynamic shifted. He wasn't the boss anymore. He was just a man who had let the woman he loved fall through the cracks of his own life. But the moment didn't last. He straightened his tie, the mask of the Mafia boss sliding back into place. He told me that the people who scared me were still out there, and they were still waiting. But he also told me that they would never get close to me again, not while he was still breathing. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the fear was already too deep. Do you think she should trust him or keep running? Comment your thoughts. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that his protection was just a different kind of threat, that being a bird in a cage was still being a prisoner, even if the cage was made of gold and high-rise glass. I opened my mouth to tell him that I would never go back to that life, that I would rather raise my sons in a shelter than in a house full of people who hated me for existing. But the words never came. Instead, a sudden, warm rush of fluid hit the floor, soaking into the expensive carpet at my feet. The world seemed to pause. The sharp, metallic scent of the lobby was replaced by the biological reality of what was happening. My water had broken. I stared down at the floor, my brain refusing to process the timing. I was only 8 months along. I had 4 weeks left. I wasn't ready. The nursery corner in my apartment was still empty. I hadn't even packed a bag for the hospital yet. I looked up at Wu Jin, and for the first time since I walked into the building, the mask of the Mafia boss didn't just slide. It shattered. He was at my side before I could even stumble. His hands, which I had spent months fearing, were suddenly the only thing keeping me upright. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't panic. He just pulled me into his chest, his voice dropping into a low, commanding tone that wasn't directed at me, but at the world around us. "It's happening now," he said, and I realized he was speaking into a small device on his wrist. Within seconds, the quiet lobby was alive with movement. Men I hadn't seen were suddenly there. Doors were being held open, and the black sedan was pulling right up to the glass entrance. I felt a contraction ripple through my body, a sharp, searing pain that made my knees buckle. I let out a sound I didn't recognize, a low groan of pure instinct. He picked me up as if I weighed nothing, his arms steady and sure. I tried to push him away, my pride still trying to fight the inevitable, but he just held me tighter. He told me to breathe. He told me that he had me, and that nothing was going to happen to our sons. The drive to the hospital was a blur of sirens and high-speed turns. I was lying across the back seat, my head in his lap, while he kept one hand on my stomach and the other on his phone, barking orders in Korean. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the intent. He was clearing the path. He was making sure that the world stopped turning so that his children could be born in safety. I looked up at his face, silhouetted against the passing streetlights. He looked older. He looked like a man who was finally realizing that all the power in the world couldn't stop the clock when it came to life and death. I reached out and grabbed his hand, squeezing it until my fingers felt like they would snap. I realized that the fight between us didn't matter anymore now. The wheels of the stretcher clicked against the tiles in a way that sounded too loud for such a quiet floor. I wasn't at the clinic in Brooklyn. I wasn't in the public hospital where I'd spent months seeing myself. We had pulled into a private underground entrance at St. Jude's, and within seconds, a team of 6 doctors was already moving me. There was no intake form. There was no insurance card to present. The woman at the desk just looked at Wu Jin and nodded, and the elevator doors slid open to a floor that didn't even have a number on the digital display. This was the secure wing. The air smelled like lemon and expensive soap, not medicine. It was a place where privacy was the only currency that mattered. Wu Jin stayed by my side, his hand never leaving the railing of the stretcher. He was still barking orders, his voice low and steady, making sure the head of obstetrics was the one handling my case. I looked up at him, my vision blurring from the pain of another contraction, and I realized that my independence had officially ended the moment we crossed the threshold of this building. I was back in his world, a world where rules didn't apply to him, and where protection looked exactly like a prison. He had built this entire infrastructure for me before he even knew I was ready to use it. They wheeled me into a suite that looked more like a luxury apartment than a delivery room. There were no monitors chirping, no blank walls, just soft wood and leather chairs. But behind the panels, I could see the glint of medical equipment. It was a golden cage designed to keep the outside world out and me in. A nurse with a kind face and eyes that had seen too much told me to breathe. She didn't call me Beverly. She called me Mrs. Chai. The name felt like a weight around my neck. I looked at Wu Jin, who was standing by the window, his back to me again, looking out over a city he claimed to own. He had told me he was protecting me, but as the monitors finally started to hum, I felt the truth. I wasn't just a patient. I was the keeper of his legacy, and I was being locked down for safekeeping. The pain hit again, deeper this time, and I realized there was no going back to the apartment on the 4th floor. That life was gone. I was his now. I was exactly where he wanted me to stay forever. The world outside no longer mattered. I closed my eyes and pushed. The room went silent, a heavy, airless quiet that felt like the world was holding its breath. Then, the first sound broke it. A thin, jagged cry that didn't belong in a luxury suite. Then another, identical and just as demanding. I lay there, my body feeling hollowed out and distant, my skin damp with sweat and the sheer effort of existing. The nurse moved with a clinical grace I couldn't quite follow, but I saw them. 2 small, red, flailing bundles of life that had spent 8 months hiding inside me. They were real. They weren't secrets anymore. They were people. I watched Wu Jin. He hadn't moved from the bedside since the pushing started, his hand gripping mine so hard I thought my bones might merge with his. He looked at the babies, and for a long moment, he didn't say a word. The man who could buy an entire hospital, the man who controlled thousands of lives with a single phone call, was frozen. The nurse brought the first baby over to him. He didn't hesitate. He reached out and took the boy, his large hands dwarfing the tiny frame. He held him like he was made of glass, but there was something else in his grip. Ownership. He looked down at his son, and I saw the shift. It wasn't just love. It was the weight of the Chai name settling onto those small shoulders. He wasn't just a father. He was a patriarch seeing his future for the first time. He brought the baby to my chest, then reached for the second. As I held them both, the scent of them, new and sweet, filled my senses, momentarily pushing back the fear. But then I looked up at Wu Jin. He was standing over us, a weight that felt protective and terrifying all at once. "They have your eyes," he whispered. It was the first time he had spoken since the birth. His voice was thick, raw with an emotion he didn't know how to hide. "But they have my jaw. They are Chai blood. Nobody will ever touch them." It sounded like a promise, but to me, it sounded like a sentence. By giving birth to these boys, I had given him the ultimate leverage. I had given him 2 reasons never to let me go. I had spent 8 months trying to keep them from myself, trying to give them a life that didn't involve tattoos and charcoal suits and silent sedans. But looking at the way he held them, I knew that battle was lost. They weren't just my babies. They were the next generation of a world I hated. I looked at their small, perfect faces and felt a tear slip down my temple. I had saved them from the dark, but I had delivered them straight into the heart of the Empire. I was a mother now, and my only job was to survive him. I would never be free from his reach again. Wu Jin left the hospital room an hour after the boys were born. He didn't say where he was going, but he didn't have to. The air in the suite felt lighter, like a storm had passed through and left only the wreckage behind. I sat in the oversized bed, holding a twin in each arm, watching the news on the wall-mounted screen. It wasn't the usual celebrity gossip. It was a corporate massacre. For members of the Helion Capital Board were resigning effective immediately. Their stocks were tanking. Their personal lives were being dragged through the mud on every financial blog in the country. Wu Jin didn't use guns for this. He used numbers. He used the very system they tried to use to push me out. He found the one person who had sent that photo, his own cousin, a man who thought he could dictate who was worthy of the Chai name. Wu Jin didn't just fire him. He erased him. He made sure the man's bank accounts were frozen and his reputation was turned into ash. It was a cold, calculated justice that made my skin crawl. This was the man I had married. This was the father of my children. He was a protector, yes, but his protection came with a body count of a different kind. He was tearing down the structures that allowed people to threaten me. The nurse came in to check my vitals, her expression neutral. She knew what was happening on the news, but she wouldn't say a word. In this wing, silence was the law. I looked at my sons. They were sleeping, unaware that their father was currently tearing apart a multi-billion-dollar empire to prove a point. He was telling his family, his enemies, and the city that I was untouchable. But as I watched the ticker at the bottom of the screen, I didn't feel safe. I felt like a trophy that had been fought over and won by the strongest player. Wu Jin returned at midnight. He didn't look tired. He looked clean. He sat in the chair by the window and watched me for a long time without saying anything. He had a smudge of ink on his thumb, the only sign of the work he'd done. He told me the threat was gone. He told me I could sleep now. But how do you sleep when you know the person guarding the door is capable of such thorough destruction? I realized that the leave warning was the kindest thing anyone in his world had ever done for me. They wanted me gone to save the bloodline, but Wu Jin wanted me here to own it. The choice was never mine. It was always his. I looked at my sons and wondered which part of him they would inherit, the silence or the sting. I lay my head back, knowing the world I knew was gone forever. I was just another piece of his massive and very cold-blooded empire now. The news of the board purge didn't stay internal for long. By the third day, the rumors started to change shape. It wasn't just about corporate greed anymore. It was about the woman in the secret wing. A photo of the black sedan at the entrance of St. Jude's appeared on a major news site. Then, someone leaked my maiden name. The internet did the rest. Within hours, my face from an old social media profile was being compared to the blurred image of the pregnant woman in the lobby. The secret I had guarded for 8 months was now a trending topic. I felt the panic rising again, that familiar urge to pack a bag and run until the pavement ended. But there were 2 babies in the room now. There was no running. Wu Jin walked in with a tablet in his hand, his face a mask of iron. He didn't look worried about the leak. In fact, as I watched him, I realized he hadn't tried to stop it. He had let the information out. He was forcing the world to see us. He told me it was time to leave the hospital. He didn't ask if I was ready to face the cameras. He just handed me a dress. I'm not doing this, I said, my voice shaking. I'm not becoming a headline. You were already a target, Beverly, he replied. Now, you are the wife of the head of the Chai family. There is no middle ground. The world is watching now. There's no more hiding, no more secrets, and no more running. This is the moment everything changes for good. If you want to see how this ends, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that like button if you think she should have stayed hidden. Comment stay or fight, and tell me your time and city. The lobby of the hospital was swarming with reporters when we walked out. The security team formed a human wall. The flashes of the cameras were like lightning hitting my eyes. Wu Jin didn't hide me. He didn't pull a coat over my head. He walked right beside me. His hand was resting firmly on the small of my back, guiding me through the chaos. He stopped for a split second, long enough for every lens to capture him looking down. It was a claim. It was a declaration of war against anyone who had ever doubted my place at his side. He was telling the world that the twins weren't just his sons. They were the heirs to everything he owned. The car door closed, cutting off the noise. But the silence inside was even louder. I looked at him, the man who had turned my life into a public spectacle without my consent. He had taken my safety and traded it for status. He had taken my silence and traded it for a brand. I asked him if he was happy now that everyone knew. He looked at me and said secrecy ended today. The penthouse didn't feel like a home yet, but it didn't feel like a cell either. It was a space built of marble and silence, overlooking the city that had tried to swallow me whole. My twins were sleeping in a nursery that cost more than my last 3 years of rent. Wu Jin stood on the balcony, his silhouette sharp against the New York skyline. He didn't come inside to tell me what to do. He didn't demand I sit at his table. He just stayed there, a silent sentinel between us and the world that had tried to tear us apart. Earlier today, he handed me a set of keys and a passport with my real name on it. He told me I could stay, or I could leave, but he wouldn't let me live in a walk-up with a broken lock again. It was a choice, but we both knew it wasn't. I couldn't walk away from the protection he offered, not now that the whole world knew my face. But there was one thing he hadn't figured out yet. As I rocked the boys, I thought about the man who had actually helped me disappear 8 months ago. The person who provided the fake ID and the subway passes. Wu Jin thinks he's purged every traitor in his circle, but he's wrong. The person who helped me run is still sitting at his right hand, watching and waiting. My secret is out, but theirs is just beginning. I looked at Wu Jin and wondered if he'd ever realized that the most dangerous person in the room isn't an enemy. It is someone who thinks they're doing him a favor. For now, I'll stay. I'll be the wife he needs and the mother my sons deserve. But I'll keep my eyes open. Because in this world, even a gold cage has shadows. Now, I have to ask you, if you were in my place, would you have chosen this life of luxury, or would you have kept running? Like and subscribe. Tell me your city, time, and favorite part in my story.